everyone. So I'm joined by Brian and by Frank, and we're going to be discussing the role of newspace, as Candy so wonderfully described it yesterday evening, and looking at the role that Europe's doing in terms of helping startups and helping new companies to work in space, but also what's happening on an international level and the need to actually work together in the future as well. So I'm Sarah Cruddas, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm actually a space broadcaster and journalist, and my job is to talk in the UK and also in America about the work that you do and really sell it to the public and lay people in terms of why space matters and why we should be investing. And I'm joined by Frank, who is Head of Technology Transfer at ESA. And Frank, if you could just give us a quick introduction about what you do.
Yeah, we were joking already behind the stage. I always say I'm the head of the recycling office in ESA. So I'm taking care of the innovation and the ideas which are not used twice. And we're taking care of the patents of ESA. We have a technology transfer broker network, so we ask the space industry what they develop. On the other side, we ask the non-space industry what keeps the R&D manager awake in the night, and then we bring them together. We have idea competitions, app camps, which we support for the idea generation. We're running, by the end of the year, 16 incubation centers in 27 locations, supporting 130 new startups every year, which is, I would say, quite big for Europe. For downstream, and we're also starting in upstream. We work with the venture capital industry as well as European Business Angel Network, where we signed the deal. So we really support the entire eco-environment, from the idea to the business development, to the entrepreneurship, until the financing. I have no space background. I'm an industrial engineer, worked for Apple until 2000, had my own startup company, so I know what it means to grow. I started with 2 people, at the peak I had 350 people, and then 2002-03 the bubble burst, so I had to reduce. And I was a little bit bored. IT was really boring, 2003, and I got an offer from ESA to become the head of commercial development of human spaceflight. And
is that what you do when you're bored?
Yes. And I said, I was not married, no kids at that time, and I said, working with astronauts, pretty cool. And then later I figured out where I ended up. So, but still there, and since 10 years we are running the TTP and my group, and we have a lot of fun because we try to be the aliens in ESA.
Okay, wonderful. And on the other side of the fence, we've got Brian Lim, who's actually a CEO and founder. So if you're able to explain a little bit more about what you do, Brian.
Yeah, sure. So I sort of joined the space industry in 2013, and I've been trying to figure out what I wanted to do since. So I was building a company, building hyperspectral satellites, which allows me to basically do chemical analysis of the Earth from space. You know, but my background is a little bit more longer than the 2 years. I started being an entrepreneur in 2011. And just like Frank here, I don't have a space background prior. My background's IT and medical research. And so when I made the switch over, it was a little bit of a confusion. But since then, I have supported over 600 startups in their businesses. I have gotten more than 10, I consider personally, to investment or revenue generation. And of that, 6 or 7 of them actually sit in the space industry today. And you know, my CV in the space industry isn't as long as Frank's, and I do not have the luxury of working for the ESA's recycling office. I just work in backwater Australia. But we'll get on to
Australia in a minute.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you as well that after our Q&A, we're actually going to be taking Q&As from you guys in the audience, and we're going to be using an iPad to do that. So if you're able to write down your questions using the app, and then we'll be able to field those at the end of the session. But I'd just like to begin with asking you both, it does feel a bit weird being in the middle, so I'll just move back a bit.
We like that.
In terms of, and I think it really is a question for you, Frank, where are we in terms of space startups in Europe, and do you think there's probably a bit more we could be doing, or a lot more?
I always believe we can do a lot more. We are proud that we have, as I said, 130 companies this year, and over the past years, we started really with 8, 2006 per year, and we're growing. The trend will be and there's most of the companies are downstream, which is technology transfer is nice, but we have really to focus also on the spin in, so going upstream. And I think it's vital because for our space industry, it's also vital for ESA itself. ESA might have to change because when you make a proposal to ESA, the first evaluation criteria is background and experience. So if you have a company, 3 people, 3 years old, we kick them out in our evaluation because not valid. And I think this has to change. This has to change from the big primes I'm looking, see in the audience. We have to change that from ESA to allow new ideas coming in. And if we have that, I think we still have better startup companies in terms of space in Europe than in the US, with a better majority, with better educated people, and better possibilities, but the problem is that we don't have the growth capital to support them. And I think industry and ESA has to change in this respect, in terms of more openness, innovation, and let the innovation from the outside in.
Would you almost say there's a fear from big old institutions, such or say older institutions such as ESA, against the smaller, the Mavericks, those kinds of companies?
It's when you see an organization like Google, which they bought 167 startup companies last year, but also old companies like Procter & Gamble. They have really a strategy to get companies and innovation inside. And the normal way in our industry is doing, we assimilate the companies. So you buy a company, you assimilate them, you put the logo on it, and the innovation goes down. And there's something in the middle where you make maybe a share, you allow them a purchase deal, and this is more, I think, what I see in the US, and this is why it works. The eco environment is better structured, and a colleague in the Commission said that, and I quote him: the space industry is like the Addams family. They're pretty cool. They have a lot of tricks, but for the outside, they're freaks. And I think this
You've just insulted everyone.
Yes, that's good. And I'm sure I get grilled for that, but it's the truth. And this is what we have to overcome. When we're looking into evolution, there's only two ways of evolution: either evolution or dying out. This is also for industry. So, and there's no way between. And this is good because in nature, evolution keeps cleaning up the ecosystem. So, and there will be never a vacuum because it will be filled right away by new companies. I will have Planet Labs, SpaceX. So competition is very, very healthy. And evolution has worth taking care. The problem is sometimes that we have systems where we pump money into zombie companies which are staying alive when we should not stay alive. So we need this healthy competition, and I would hope that this we have more in Europe.
Okay, now actually looking at it from the other side of the fence, Brian, your companies are based in Australia. It's not the place you'd normally associate with space as much as other countries. What's your experience, and what do you think Europe can learn from what you've done?
Well, I mean, Australia has a very, very small space industry. We actually spend about $1 billion, predominantly in defense, like space spending, and so it doesn't seem in the commercial. But what we are excited about is actually Asia. So Asia is going to be the growing place. There's a huge demand for space data, especially in the downstream. A lot of countries in Southeast Asia want access to the data, but they don't want to necessarily build their own space programs. So that's an incredible opportunity that a lot of us in Australia are jumping forward to take part in. And this is where our first excitement comes from. The second excitement we're getting really is that we actually don't have a space agency. That's both good and bad. Now, we would love the support of having someone like an ESA equivalent in Australia, but the ability we have, because we don't have one, is we can take a bigger risk. So you're going to see space startups from Australia doing crazy stuff because we don't have somebody on the top saying you can't do it. We're just trying it on our own. And so when we come back here, it goes like, we've done this, and people goes like, excuse me, you've done what? Those are the two real things like driving the Australian space scene. And because we are still learning where we're going and what we're trying to become as a space industry as a whole, there's a lot of room for us to grow and evolve. Now, if you look at Asia, they're pretty much in the same place. China recently passed legislation that allows companies to build space companies, effectively, I think, in the last 6 months. So what we're now seeing here is an influx of the Chinese looking to not only invest in space companies in Asia, but also into Australia and other parts. And this is incredibly interesting because we all know how China has an incredible manufacturing base. So I'm excited to see how China is actually going to lower the cost of getting into access to space, because we can now make parts cheaper in volume. And this is one of the conversations I think Frank and I had back, is space is still expensive, but we need to find ways to reduce the costs. And that be in hardware platform reduction costs, middleware, or other things. And this is exactly what's going on in Asia and the rest of the world right now.
So where would, in your opinion, you say is leading the way at the moment in terms of space startups, would you say it's Asia or America, or I take it Europe's lagging behind slightly at the moment?
Well, let's break it down a little bit. everyone is actually playing a very different role in the space startup scene. I will honestly say that Europe is taking a lead in the CubeSat industry, and it has done very well. And I think America is definitely in second place behind Europe for this. What I think America is really good at is actually commercialization. So if you look at Silicon Valley, most of the research actually comes from institutions and other venues. Silicon Valley is actually really good at commercialization and they find these technologies and they spin it up. That's where they get the press and the money to do these things. But the technology still comes from other places. Europe has better technology in this arena. If you talk about Asia, Asia is honestly playing the catch-up game. They're building incredible capabilities in downstream application and markets. Singapore is an example where they're trying to build the full suite from building satellites to downstream, and they're working very hard at it. And the other countries are focusing predominantly on downstream to gain access. And us sitting in Australia, we're just trying to service that in Asia.
Okay, and in terms of, obviously, it's part of American culture, so they are more used to that entrepreneurial spirit, that turning something into business. What do you think's lacking with scientists in Europe at the moment, or with companies such as these two at the moment, in turning something great from science into something great of business, which will help to drive forward the space industry here?
I think this is the discussion we had also this morning. In general, what we see of our 400 companies we have supported, the technology is not an issue. It's always the business model or the management team. So, and the best management team is the mixed pickles team, you know, like we go on a party where you know 10 people and the rest of the 50 you don't know. Then you have fun. If you know all of them and you see them every year, it sucks because it becomes boring. So, and if the management team should be also in terms of complementary. And when we see a lot of companies, we don't have that. And as I said, the technology, they manage, they're very good in that. Where we have a problem is what is the business model behind? Where in the US, this is much more developed. And when we go back to the CubeSat scenario, I think this will be also the biggest trend. Looking from space, upstream, we're good in building hardware. And we never thought about how really to commercialize this, what we do that. And Candace nicely mentioned it yesterday. SL Astra was looking for the commercialization, you know, filling the transponders. This is what it is. So for the CubeSats, we get great pictures, what we do with it. So we signed recently a deal with SAP to put all our Sentinel data into the cloud platform of HANA. So if we put the Planet Labs data in there, and Planet Labs, I think Chris was mentioning that in his presentation, it's the same problem, you know, what we do with the data. So, and we don't speak with space people, we speak with the people which working and writing APIs in the developer toolkit of iOS or Android or the HERE platform. So the future will be rather a logic store using also space data with other data and not an app store. So, and then we have to speak about the middleware, and then the business model turns around, because when you need a picture of spot image, you pay first and then you get a picture. This will not work. You will pay when you make business out of it. So I think this is what will be the big next trend, and the US is better in this because they come from the IT, from the internet community, and they say, okay, how I make an honest buck out of this data quickly? Where we are still looking, wow, this is a cool camera, this is a cool thruster, and we built the hardware and we're very proud.
And then not doing anything with it.
Not as they maybe could.
So what more do you think ESA and other large institutions can do to help startups in Europe and to help nurture that industry and to not leave it to the Americans?
What
do you think you're lacking at the moment?
I'm very honest, my budget is 0.12% of the entire ESA budget. Then you can see at least what is the level of commitment my agency has, even when our Director General really loves what we do. So in the mountains we say, sometimes you have to pay a schnapps more to get the results. And I believe in homeopathic treatments, you know. It's not that you need big amounts, but sometimes you have to chip in the right amount of money. And the thing is, what ESA is good in, we're good in international cooperation. We don't steal the companies, we don't move them from continents to another, yeah, which is the American model, to be open. So this is what ESA can play. The job of ESA is to enable the space industry, and I believe that ESA can also enable the new space industry and the innovation, because we are the neutral body. We are like the nice uncle with 50K in the pocket, which we give to the startups without having a share, and having the right logo for the companies, giving accreditation, and the right address book to get the first, the second, and the third customer. And I think this we have to do just a little bit more.
And Brian, what's your experience in terms of dealing with Europe and what improvements there could be?
What I see in the European market is, like I was speaking to you all as well, is, as Frank says, we're focusing on the high-end technology. And for myself, what I found when I interact out is that a lot of us actually need to provide intelligence. So when I speak to mining companies, agriculture, or other institutions, they don't really care whether I use a satellite, a drone, or I have to milk a cow to give them the report they want. All they really want is something that can come to them and says, okay, based on this information, I can make an immediate decision, an action that actually impacts my business. So when we go talk about, we got this really cool satellite, I got this ground station that can do all this, I see constantly among the entrepreneurs, not just in space, but in Europe in general, this disconnect between what they're actually building and what the customer wants. And Frank gave a great example about, like, you guys will genetically engineer a cow because it's great to build the greatest cow when all the person needs is a glass of milk at 50 cents.
And you're right, that this is the problem. You're looking to Europe, we have the Earth Observation Director doing something, the telecommunication, the group of the TTP in Salzgeber is doing something. So we're really looking to the silo thinking. There's a nice saying also we use: when you go fishing, you have to take care that the worm is delicious for the fish, not for the fisher. And sometimes we forget that. And the Commission is the same. They have the GSA, they have the Copernicus office. But what we need is a supermarket where I buy milk, sugar, everything. And I don't care where it comes from. So our institution, the Commission in ESA, I think you have to group these things. At least I speak for ESA, and I repeat what our Director General Jan Werner says. We have to group these commercial activities, because when we look to customers like BayWa, BMW, or John Deere, they don't care out of which directorate or organization it's come. They have a customer need. Either we can fulfill that need of our industry or not. And if we can't fulfill it, bad luck.
But there's obviously a huge appetite and also a legacy of space within Europe. The will's there, but what more do you think actually needs to be done to be able to nurture the next generation of startups for the space 2.0 or 4.0 or new space or whatever you want to call it?
I think it's easy. It's the openness also of the CEOs and the top management of our industry, because otherwise they may have a problem in 10 years. This openness is also in ESA, not everywhere. Why we not to have 1,000 companies in that area? And more I think the mindset is the biggest problem we have. Normally the money is there. We just spent maybe the money in the wrong direction.
So would you say it's more of a cultural issue at the moment?
Yes.
So how do we change that?
Evolution or die out. So with the die out, you can help a little bit. You force them to die out. You can't shoot them; it's illegal. But
do you think sometimes it must be frustrating for entrepreneurs having that idea, but just not being able to get almost through that impenetrable wall of the larger institutions?
Well, as much as I agree, it's annoying, it's difficult, and there are many times I bang against the head of the wall. I think I'd rather put my head up a rocket engine. No, I do not. But there's also a very important point about that. If you're not getting past the wall, like we all talk about red tape and bureaucracy, and we don't like it. Now, if you think about it carefully, red tape and bureaucracy is there for one thing. It is to create predictable results. You're going there, you said you have 10,000 people doing something, you need to make a process to manage to make sure they can provide something that is consistent. That's basically red tape and bureaucracy's purpose. If you don't have a value proposition, a product that is so valuable that you're not going to get around the red tape. If I came to you all tomorrow and says, by the way, I've just invented a working time machine, and I can go into the future and figure out where to win every race for the next 100 years, tell me how much red tape and bureaucracy you're actually going to be dealing with. Zilch. You'll be right at the top. Am I right, Frank?
Yes. And it's true. Our previous director general is a mechanical engineer, and always said, in mechanical engineer you have friction. And in a system where you don't have a friction, you do something wrong. And in our area, we have a lot of friction, which tells us we do a lot of things right. And this you have to ignore and continue and fight the bureaucracy and just ignore it. Continue, like Candace said yesterday, said, hammer, hammer, hammer. If it takes 5 years, 10 years, 20, it does not matter. We continue.
Yeah. And to your point, like, where do we go? What do we need? Part of what I've realized is among a lot of entrepreneurs is there's a few things that are missing. And I'll just simplify it to 2 areas. I think we need more entrepreneurs to have systems thinking beyond technical systems thinking. So what Frank and I are really good at, and it's quite clear, is we have a systems think about more than just what is technical. We know the business needs, the customer need. We know who to pick up the phone to help deal with government red tape. That's the kind of systems thinking is needed. The second issue, and this is more for the space industry, is we deal with what we call as a wicked problem. Not in a good way, but a bad way. So a wicked problem in Just is simply a problem that is extremely complex, requires multiple stakeholders, and there's no fixed solution. There's no right or wrong, it's just how good or bad you are on a scale of 1 to 10. A lot of entrepreneurs are very good at solving other kinds of problems, but when it comes to this kind of scale, they don't get it. And as a space industry, as a new space industry, we're quite immature. There's a lot of the basic infrastructures that the ICT world has and we can take for granted that doesn't exist, we have to build. So we actually have to sit down and figure out how that whole ecosystem looks like and start building pieces for the puzzle. I can sit here and say, great, I'm building a space company with launching satellites, but that's not going to actually help my business because my ego of saying I want to build a space company and launch satellites doesn't actually move the business forward. So you got to take this holistic picture, put your ego aside, and think about the whole system. And when you're willing to do that, you immediately know where you can place yourself to benefit the most for yourself and for the industry as a whole.
So do you think maybe one solution might be companies such as ESA actually coming forward and saying, these are our problems at the moment, where can startups help, instead of startups saying, I have an idea, will you just take it, when that's an idea which might not fit in with the need?
Maybe I think what the discussion is rather, where can ESA support this startup ecosystem?
Yeah.
And this is what we do. The success of what we have with our startup is not only that we have the big, it's that we started to support this ecosystem. And then the startups and the entrepreneurs can decide, or even space companies, I'm there, they are there, and then you can grow. Because when you look into the business cases, what we have also in Earth observation, we do one-to-one businesses. We build one product, even application for one customer. We don't do business end-to-end. Yeah, and scale it. But you only can scale and have end-to-end business when you have this eco-environment. When you say, okay, cool, I have data, but there's a crowd platform which I can use. I dump my data, somebody else will sell it for me, perfect. I focus on my part. So I think this is right, and we have that in the early start, this ecosystem, from the venturing, from the IP, from the corporate partners, from the business. But it's not solid yet, it's not strong. And if you make this machine solid, this does not matter if you have one company or 5,000. This will just grow and make the ecosystem stronger.
No, I completely agree. That's the right approach. I think I do not know about Europe, from my experience in Australia, because we don't have this kind of backing. We have to figure this out on our own. And for me, if I was in your position in Europe, I would love to hear what ESA's challenges are, and that's how you support the ecosystem, putting it out. But I'm more interested in knowing why they are the challenge versus what is the challenge. Because,
why is that?
Well, very simply, we often, when a problem is put on the table, it is a problem that we know about. But we may not necessarily know why the problem arises in the first place. Now, if you talk about, for example, you're thirsty, I'll get you a glass of water. That solves your immediate need. But it takes somebody else to go says, how do I make sure you always have tap in your water? Now, that is a bigger problem to solve than just water in your glass. And when you're willing to take a few steps back and think that way, you actually get to the really difficult problems, but the ones that need solving. This is how you end up with conversations about ending world food hunger, how do we handle our needs for water and climate change. Those are the ultimate big end conversations. But somewhere in between, you actually can sit at solving the big why these problems are occurring in the first place. And ESA's not going to tell you what they are. It's not because they don't want to. It's if they knew, they would be working on it already. So they are in some sense blindsided. And so, or they just don't think that's all I can do. It doesn't matter. But if you're willing to play the game all the way back there, you can build incredible companies who actually, on vision alone, has the ability to raise money and execute on some incredible things. And every little step you take means 10 times more than a company further downstream.
I think Frank wanted to say
I think
something
it depends who you ask in our organization. It's my private opinion, by the way. I think sometimes who we are, that we know what industry and the real end user wants. So how the good thing is since 22 years we do the technology transfer and we work with non-space industry. Really from everything, from oil and gas to automotive to healthcare to farmers, doesn't matter. So what we connect our startup companies with their users, and this dialogue we facilitate. That's the only thing. So we are the person, the shoehorn office maybe, or we are arranging the marriages, and that's it. And most of the time, this is the missing link for also the successful business model, because they have a problem, they can't solve it, they know that we are neutral, they come to us, and they say, oh, by the way, yes, we know. So this matchmaking between the person who can do and solve the problem and the user, this is the key. And it's not up to us to decide what are the critical problems, because I think we are not making our money with it, we're not daily confronted, we try to do it in several areas, but due to the fact that we work with non-space industry, we are well aware what keeps them, as I said, awake in the night, or what is the really issue. And the startup companies are much quicker find a solution than our organization will do.
Okay, we're going to move the conversation on ever so slightly, unless you wanted to pick up just on that point.
That's all right.
No? Okay. So we're going to have time for questions from you guys in a minute, but just moving on, I mean, we've touched on downstream opportunities, but in terms of downstream and upstream, where do you think current opportunities lie for startups at the moment, and how do you foresee that changing?
I have one good example. It's a company, they make solar trackers, so that your solar cells is always perfect in the angle of the sun. This guy is one of the best specialists in Europe, maybe even worldwide. He made a spin-off company for terrestrial market, for solar concentrators. If you buy a solar tracker with TNO, you pay 16,000 euros. He sells it now to the non-space world for 350 euros and spin it back into space. And out of the serial production, he says, okay, it costs a quarter, 3,500. So I think this is the challenge, to say that the innovation is not a one-way street, and also technology transfer, it's a circle. You spin it out, you do the mass production, and it goes back to space. This is the way how we get cheaper products. And this is what we have to take up. This is the biggest challenge, that then Airbus just awarded this company as a prime supplier for OneWeb's constellation, that our industry takes up these companies. If we don't take up these chances, we kill them. Yeah? Or they move to the US or somewhere else. So I think the challenge is we have to allow this feeding back loop, or even starting. So, and also our own financing, technology TRP program is only for existing companies, maybe SMEs, but not for new starters. Why not? And I think we should really have a gateway or a door where we allow these activities. If we don't do that, we kill the plant already in the beginning.
And do you want to pick up on that, Brian, particularly with your own experiences?
No, you're very right. We have to get as close to the new companies and right down to the startups as possible. And one of the challenges as close as you get to the line is how do you filter out the companies that can actually deliver on the promises and those who can't. And that is actually a challenge that nobody as an industry has figured out yet. I mean, if you talk at Y Combinator, I think that they last counted 940 companies went through their program, and only 7 or 8 became billion-dollar companies. And more than half the cohort has closed their businesses. It's still a very difficult process. And we need everybody's help to figure this one out. If whoever cracks this first has actually figured out the real gold mine in the business world. The part I want to add from you, at least, is I agree that you got to spin outside the space industry and come back. So one of the startups I advise is the company is called CubeWriter. And they sell CubeSat kits to schools. It is space-grade hardware that goes into the schools. But the interesting thing about doing that is that suddenly they're not making one hardware that goes into space. They've just made, 1,000. And suddenly the cost of making a CubeSat is distributed. Now, to the customer base, they care about the education. If the satellite blows up on the launch pad, it is not a business risk, actually. It's a technical risk. So they are successful as a business without taking up the traditional technical risk of a space company. But now, when they want to launch satellites to do the kids' education and build our future platforms, they can do so at their leisure and not affect it. And this is one of the out-of-the-box thinking things that we need to do as a space industry and think beyond ourselves, really. And I believe that's what you were trying to get to as well, right?
It's the business. This is what we do in our challenge. well, how Airbnb have changed the business model for hotels, or Apple with music. What is the different business model we can have behind space business? And we discussed with the CEO of Deorbit. The only way how we think about Deorbit is ESA pays. Or why not having a recycling point? You know, when you launch something, you pay already the recycling of old set. Where is the new business model behind space and the space companies? And most likely it will not come, as you said, maybe from a space person. Yeah.
Do you think it's something that you just can't foresee in the same way you couldn't have foreseen those other opportunities, such as Airbnb?
Yeah, there's a nice saying that say inefficient artists copy, efficient artists imitate. No, the other way around. So copy is okay, you know, when you see a business model running, why not adapting it? We had once a company which was measuring floods, and they said, who's paying? Yeah, the government and in the cities. Oh, so they are really bankrupt, yeah? So it's working not very well. But ever thought about dry? Yeah, if you measure a dry, why we should do that? I said, well, if you have to shut down a nuclear power plant because you not have enough water in your river, this is really costs. So therefore, it's not about the technology, it's always about the business plan, where my money flow comes from. And therefore, you need some maybe non-space, and we saw the picture of Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. And there are nice stories what Wozniak has done when he was the first time having the first colored TV for his computer. He said, I do not know how it works, but if I can imitate the wave of an analog TV signal via digital signal, maybe it works. Poof, here it's 16 colors. So sometimes a little bit knowledge and not too much knowledge is excellent. And Wozniak had more examples of this. So I think this is what you have to have, is say, well, asking not stupid, but crazy questions.
Agreed.
Okay, and just one final question before we actually bring in questions from the audience. In terms of potential with startups within Europe, where can you foresee it growing, or is it something which is too impossible to tell yet?
I normally use one slide. 500 million years ago, evolution has brought up, was it the Cambrian explosion, where we had the new varieties of species coming up. And I think this we have in Europe. Maybe also due to the crisis, you know, because the risk in Spain and Portugal to get no job, to having a stagiairship unpaid, or the risk to create a startup company is the same risk. So the crisis has a positive element in this. So I hope that we have more startup companies, and also it's trendy to become an entrepreneur. So this is really a strength, and I see these rise of startup companies, not only in space, coming in Europe. And this, if we are clever, we use it. Because most of the companies we have now in business, they also started small. We have to go back to the roots, and this we have to foster and pay and support whatever it costs.
Okay, and in terms of international collaboration, how important, I think this is a question for both of you actually, how important will that be in the long-term future in terms of space startups?
I think it's absolutely probably one of the most important things we have to deal with. Look, end of the day, innovation will not just come from Europe, they'll come from Asia, Australia, the United States. Roll a dice, you can name a country. Something will come from there. If you choose to close yourself off, you will eventually, you might take the lead in the short term, but you will lose out in the long term because everyone else will simply out-innovate you. A good, real simple example is you look at Linux, the operating system. In such a short span of time, since its existence, it was about 4 or 5 years, it went from something that people wanted to play with to something that's now basically running most of the servers on the internet. And because it provided a stable operation platform, it became an alternative. This is an example of incredible collaboration at scale. And people have harnessed that. That's why we have Airbnb, that's why we have Uber now. If you're willing to play it at the international level, you're going to get every opportunity possible. And that takes a different kind of entrepreneur to do it, but it's not something you can't become. You definitely can become one if you choose to be.
And I agree, ESA is all about cooperation when we're looking to our member states. In America, you have first growth, and then you have revenues. In the rest of the world, you have first revenues and then growth. And this is an issue in terms of growing of our companies. And the only way how you can fight this is between collaboration. So I think it's key that we collaborate with Africa, with Asia, and on a level of SMEs and FSMEs. You know, you make a trade deal, you make a license deal, you make a joint venture. So this is the way to internationalization, and you don't have to wait until 5 years. You may have the size to do that. So this is the only way to gain speed. So we are super open for that, and we foster our startup companies to do that.
Is that something you'd agree with, Brian?
Oh, totally.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to move on now to questions, and it actually links in quite nicely with the first audience question, which is from Danielle, who's a systems engineer. And when entrepreneurs think about ESA support and investment, they inevitably connect it with geopolitical factors which hinder and slow down startup pace. How can these issues be solved in favor of more innovation in Europe?
It's the geographical return, I think, of ESA and the industrial politics. I will not change it. This is a reason why we have set up the incubation centers outside a little bit of ESA. So they're working quite independent. I don't have a frank answer. I think if you have to move more funding into a different program to foster this innovation. And I think it's also the job of the big corporates and the primes, and I see some of them in your audience, to take action in this, because it's not only the job of ESA. We get the money of the member states, and some people also think that this has to go back to special industry. So I think we need both. You need the governments to push, ESA has to change in that respect, but also the big, especially the big system integrators and corporates say, well, this is my job to feed my own luck and my own pig, my own innovation.
From your point of view, is this something you would agree with?
I agree with what he's saying. Now, I don't have a background with ESA at the same level as you guys do, so I can't really comment beyond what has been really said at this conference. But in terms of general strategy, I think he's spot on.
But in terms of a global thing, even though it might not be ESA, it might be Boeing.
I didn't pay him, by the way, yeah? So
he
okay.
did. But in terms of a global thing, so it might not be ESA, it could be Boeing, it could be another company. Do you think that question is something which should actually be broader as well? It could link to a lot of other big organizations in terms of what more they can do to help entrepreneurs and startups.
Everybody, there was a statistic that I remember reading. It was that since the 1970s in the United States, 99.95% of all job creation had actually come from startups, basically new companies. And this hasn't changed. It's still going to be from the new companies that will produce those jobs. If the big companies don't play with the new companies, they will lose out in the long term. This is why, Silicon Valley is basically a giant R&D hub where everybody buys everybody. The business model is not really it's technically, well, we call it a buyout. It's more technically like, hi, I build a company, the R&D is around a product line, I just so happen to have 100 million or 1 billion people on it, and then Facebook buys WhatsApp, Everybody has to do it. That's no question, no doubt to me. And I do hope that all the larger companies actually start doing that more internationally, because that gives us actually our early exit as an entrepreneur. It gives us a bit of a safety net to know that what we're building is actually going to be valuable, and we don't necessarily have to go all the way to an IPO to exit, because it's very hard to build a company from zero to IPO. And I don't know what the stats are, but I can assure you it's less than 0.01% of companies get there.
In general, what we have to achieve, that Brian is not going, that you're not going to the US, that you come to Europe. This has to be the goal. And then we have to take, okay, mission completed. But I think there is a long wait.
Indeed.
Okay, and that actually leads quite nicely on to the next audience question. So how is the move from a local regional startup to a global marketed and orientated one supported by ESA and the private sector?
Maybe Brian first, as he's the startup.
Just repeat the question again for me, please.
Okay, it's moving as we talk. So how is the move from a local regional startup to a globally marketed and orientated one supported by ESA and the private sector? That's a question for you also.
Yeah. When you're local and you have actually and you're already revenue generating, you figured out really what is your value proposition and what the customers want. The minute you have that answer, it's much, much easier to scale to an international audience. It is very likely that the problems you're solving is not so niche that you are locked to your region. It is something that definitely can go quickly. Now, the large companies, if you know how to leverage them, so if you go find one, you can say, okay, I have 500 other customers in 20 other countries that have this kind of issue. I can bring you along, and if we can do an arrangement, you grow immediately. So use the large companies as your leverage for scale. They already have the channels, the market, the sales, and the infrastructure out there. You as a small company are very good at building a product, but you don't have necessarily the huge sales team to scale it. So it's almost like asking the large companies to be your outsourced sales division.
In general, you start with if you think you're local, you have made already the first mistake. You have to think about global, and Candice mentioned it yesterday very nicely, from the beginning. How you implement it, there are different ways. Either you grow yourself and you have offices somewhere else, or you become an OEM, as you said, or you have big brothers, partners who's doing that, or you partner. This is the different way to implement that. So these are the tools for the growth. But I think it starts, the objective has to be, we want to be a global player from the beginning. And everything, and it starts when you build all the software, it's localized already from the beginning. When you do this stuff later, it's a hassle. So which are the prime market, which are the website, do it multi-languages right away. So you have to think about the global from the beginning. Maybe you not use that aspect, but you have to think in the planning that from the beginning. And that's key. And then later you have to see how you do it. This is the next step, and it's not necessary that you have to do it everything. This is typical engineering problem. I do everything myself, from A to B, including the marketing and the PR, where they then fail. So therefore, as we said with the cow, if you need a glass of milk, you don't buy a cow. So therefore, you only focus what you're good in, and then you're looking for partners. So I'm a lazy sales guy in my heart, so therefore I say, what is the easy path?
Is that something you'd agree with, Brian?
Yeah, I definitely agree with.
Okay, so moving on, so another audience question here. How does ESA, and this is for you, Frank, how does ESA enable the cooperation between startups and established space companies?
Not enough as we should do. It's easier at the moment for outside companies. We have last year opened a branch office in Ottobrunn, but this is for spin-offs, but not for spin-in. I think this is the invitation I can give to the space industry. We would love to do that for you, or together, I would say. So I think there is a discussion within ESA, to be honest. Some people think we should do that. Some other people think we should not do it. I know that our Director General thinks we should do it. So I think ESA should have an active role in the spin-in and allowing to be like we do the development also for our space industry in R&D, that we have an active path for the spin-in towards the space industry. I think that would be a great thing to do.
I guess from your opposing side, what would you like to see from organizations such as ESA?
You know, I was discussing with Frank, what I need the most is access to the right decision makers. Now, they may not be the ones buying, but they're the ones that are going to tell me what needs fixing. Yes. And that is more valuable to me than any single dollar investment I can actually ever get. Because the moment I have a real customer's problem and I have a real solution to it, everything else is easier.
Including the space industry context. So
yes.
You need, and this ESA can play as a neutral body, the door opener. So I said, okay, this is interesting, you should speak with XYZ. And I think if ESA is clever, we should allow that also for companies outside of Europe, because we want to strengthen the European space industry, and we should, and looking for the Americans, they don't care where the technology comes from. They move the companies, even the brain drain. We maybe would not do that, but if we have a good technology and we go to OHB or Airbus, say, well, that's pretty cool, I think you might be interested. Oh, maybe we'll have a look at it. I say this is what we have to play, and ESA can do that into international level, I believe.
What do you think needs to be done next, though, to enable that to happen?
Simple, a little bit push or pressure by our space industry would be good enough, I think, to convince some of my colleagues. Was that diplomatic enough? Because you told me that
you have to be diplomatic.
Sarah told me that I have to behave, you know. And,
no, I think it's very interesting to see it from both sides, because there must be some frustration from internally within ESA in how to drive this forward, because
it's true, but
we're all on the same
I'm coming
side.
from the mountains, you know, mountain farmers, they have a very flat learning curve, you know, so I'm
Okay, so we're going to change the subject slightly with another audience question, and this is thoughts on moon and asteroid mining to be financial facilitator for space startups in new space. And that's to both of you. So do you want to go first, Brian?
All right. Let's go talk a bit about the actual mining industry today before I answer that question. So the process to find a mine, and close a mine It's not 5 years, it's not 10 years. It's actually closer to 20, maybe 30 years, depending on what kind of mine you're looking for. So there was a mine in Australia. They spent 15, 20 years trying to find it. Then they found the location, and they let the site sit for 30 years before they start mining it. So that's like almost like a 50-year cycle. Now, if you're going to do asteroid mining or lunar mining, the general consensus is if you're playing within the time frame of the mining companies are comfortable with, then it's suddenly not that crazy of a proposition. Now, if you shrink it down and go, all right, I need to go find a mine, I need to mine it, and I need to extract value out of it in a normal startup time frame, which is about a 7 years to 10-year time frame, it's actually very difficult. If you want to get to the moon, an asteroid, to do mining ahead of this curve, what we're looking for is first, a technology that does not require the heavy capital investment. I mean, until we get cheaper launches, getting to the moon will always be expensive. Getting to the asteroids will be expensive. So anything you can do to figure that out early is valuable. Second, mining companies don't go there unless they know they have something valuable. So anything you can do to go figure out what actually is there and how valuable it is probably going to be more important than your ability to actually go and mine it first. The third thing is, if you want to go to the moon, you want to go to an asteroid, think about what else you can do when you get there. I think if you build a cylinder 7 miles wide and spin it twice per minute, that's 1G gravity. I'm sure you could do that to an asteroid if you're mining it for minerals, and then suddenly you have created a gravity, and then you have a space station at the same time. Now, that's not necessarily the business case for today, but think about what else you can do along the way. Because you're going to need revenue to actually drive you and get you going to get there. Because this is going to be a long-haul game, no matter how you play it.
Last year, I think it was in autumn, President Obama signed a bill related to commercial spaceflight. And at the end of this bill, there was a very interesting paragraph about asteroid mining. And in principle, that's my private opinion again, the Americans said, okay, we don't care what we have agreed on the last 50 years in outer space, because they say, if you hammer a flag, US flag, on an asteroid, and this is your claim, the United States guarantee that this is your claim. So this is pretty radical. So when you go with small spacecrafts there and say, well, this is a pretty cool claim, you hammer your flag, it's yours. And the US government guarantees for that. And this is pretty strong. It's like in the gold rush time. And then you maybe wait 50 years, 30 years. You have to see it with the time horizon of the Vatican, maybe. And then sooner or later, you can say, it's mine. And this is the way how the American government is doing also autonomous driving. The DMV, which is responsible in California, and local DMVs anyhow, and in the US, say, okay, these are the framework and the requirements to allow autonomous driving. And dear industry, please go. Enter it, facilitate it, earn it, place the market. And I believe this is the right way to do. Maybe I work too long for American corporations because they leave it to the industry. The government makes the regulatory framework to guarantee that, and the industry goes. When we look into Europe, as I said, it's my private opinion, we have a discussion. What we should do, not do, and that's bad. Instead of saying, well, we guarantee at least the same what the Americans are doing, I think this is how we can support our industry, giving the backing they need to do long-term investment. Our problem is that we discuss it. I think it was very radical what the US has done there. Pretty cool.
Do you think maybe the space mining as an industry as a whole, the rules and regulations will be quite organic and will change as the industry grows, but will also take knowledge from maritime?
If I would be space mining, I would do it out of the US, because if a US company and the US government guarantees me in future that in 50 years when I do the mining, it's my mine, sorry, this is what you need as terms of protection also as an investor. If you do it in Europe and I do not know if the European government stays behind me, poof, I have a risk. I do not know if I would put a dime in that.
So what do you think Europe needs to do now to encourage?
And they have to say, they make this act, we do at least the same, or we fight against it, which I doubt they will do it. So at least we should guarantee our companies the same level of access and the same rights that they can work in the long term.
Okay, and is there anything you want to pick up with that, Brian?
Well, I'm not the expert on space law, so the space law here, I know I'm going to get shot down. But my understanding of the International Space Treaty is all celestial bodies are property of all mankind. but if you can move it, you can keep it. So what's stopping, I mean, so...
Moving it with a small spacecraft, you moved it. What means moving it? Yeah? So
Exactly.
A landing is already moving it, huh?
So, you know, if you want to, if we play this gray area for a little, ESA and Europe already has a means in which to allow you to gain claim to
One
an asteroid.
satellite, yeah, one asteroid, yes, true.
You know? So, I mean, what's stopping you from, you know, I think there's about 250,000 asteroids we find, basically blasting a CubeSat to everyone, crashing into it, and have a robotic arm go, here's the flag.
And by the way, ESA has the technology, we just proven it, you know, but we do nothing out of it. It's pity,
So it's more rules and regulations that need to change.
So is there going to be a flag on every ESA mission?
Okay, yeah. We
Okay,
speak of this Planet Labs.
I'm going to move you on. I'm going to move you on from now. So one final question, and then we're going to actually have to wrap up. So we've had loads of brilliant questions in, so I can only apologise that we haven't got round to them all, but I'm sure you'll be available to chat at some point later. So the final question is, how can an upstream startup in early seed phase get the funding from European angels in CubeSats and prove the business model where a lot of CapEx is needed?
We have the pleasure to have Candice Johnson here. She's the president of the European Business Angel Network. We have signed an agreement with this organization, and so the easiest to contact us. We see which locations you are, and one of the part of the agreement was that for every big we have a counterpart in the country. On Monday, also in the UK, the Serafine Capital Fund with 85 million was closed, I heard. So there is a certain moving. What we can do, we can give access to people, especially to the European Business Angel Network, which not comes only with investment, which comes also with coaching and knowledge, which is in the seed phase very, very important. And then later, this is seen if this is a VC deal or not, because most of the deals are rather business angel deal than a VC deal. But I think Candice has also a presentation. That would be a question I would really leave to one of the best person who can answer that.
She's over there if you need to find her. And is there anything else you want to pick up with that?
Yeah, like, first, Candice knows everything. I think anything I say, I all bow to the greatness that is Candice. Indeed.
Okay, Candice, I'm just going to stop you there, but if you want to speak to Candice, she's over there. Okay, so if anyone wasn't able to hear that, what Candice basically said is that they're open to all opportunities and they're very happy to invest. And I'm just going to conclude with some final thoughts here, just in terms of where you see the future going and what it means to both of you to be involved in this really exciting opportunity, because we are on the cusp of a new era where we are opening up the solar system, and business and innovation is going to play a huge part in actually driving that forward.
I simply put it, very simply, is that I tell people that space is going from the mainframe industry to the personal computer industry. And for those of who are familiar with the history of the personal computer industry, they created enormous opportunity and growth along the way. We are sitting in this exact position where, we haven't really figured out the personal computer equivalent of space just yet, but the first groups that do are the ones that are going to build what the ecosystem is going to look like for generations to come. And it's an exciting time to be in this position because, actually, I'll take a reverse back a little. Do you know that everything we launch into space is actually determined by the Roman Empire? Because whatever we send into space had to fit into the fairing of a rocket, which is determined on how long, on whether it can fit on the road of a truck on a road, and the road was determined by the width of a cart of 2 horses that were used during the Roman Empire. If you figure out now, you might have something that actually way outlives you.
Yeah.
So think about that for a moment. If we are sitting at this time that what you create could become the standard for space for all eternity.
I would love that you surprise Candice, that you surprise us with your ideas. Looking to my own career, I was part of the Newton team in Apple, which was killed by Steve because it was a John Scully project. Then I was in electronic software distribution 2000, so timing was always my issue. So I'm sitting on this position since 10 years because I had to learn to be patient. So it's my third time, I would say, that something great can happen. And this time I don't want to miss it. And I'm super proud to work with all the entrepreneurs because I have the privilege to have a job which makes a lot of fun. Because I see great people, I see great engineers, I see great technology, great business. And I agree with you. This is a super interesting and exciting time. And I, my team, and at least this part of ESA will do everything that this will fly. And we will even not stop knocking on other doors and help our startup companies. They are like our kids. So we want that our kids become adults, become big, and maybe they remember us.
Okay, well, that's a fantastic thought to end on. And thank you ever so much. And I think you both deserve a huge round of applause as well for that.
And Sarah.
Sarah.
And me. I just